Everybody. Today's webinar is on the Buddhist approaches to coaching. Michael Cullen, who's one of our associates, he has done fairly extensive work in studying Buddhism in general and things on Buddhism which are related to, in one way or another, to interpersonal and intrapersonal relationships. And I'll let him handle, rather than coming in the way of my interpretation of what it is about. Maybe as we go along, if there is any of you who has some amount of background in this, please raise your hands and we can add you to the panel as well. I'm not quite sure if it is Priya there who's coming under Ramesh Sridharan. So if that is, I mean, I know that Priya has done work on Buddhist psychology and stuff. So Priya, if you can just send us a chat message that you are in that Ramesh Sridharan name here in the label, we can promote you to the panel. If there's anybody else specifically interested, please let us know if you have a background in this. So I'll just pass the baton on to Michael. Michael, all yours.
Thank you very much, Ram. Pleasure to be here. And I look forward to sharing and learning with you. This will be an opportunity for us to learn. I really believe in coaching as a learning experience. I know there are coaches that come from a coaching psychology background. I don't. I really look at experiential learning and developmental, transformational, with folding in all different types of coaching approaches. To date, I've studied about 36 different coaching approaches, from NLP through to systemic, through to recently existential, and one thing I've always kind of noticed are certain patterns arising. And that kind of clicked in with me about Buddhism and the sense of what are the universal principles and tenets that help inform coaching. And so I'm just going to share with you the slides that I have for today. And we can take a look at that. I'll just make that full screen. Hopefully I can get rid of this. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So yes, I am a professional certified coach with the ICF. I have enough hours for MCC, so it's just a question of going through that process at some point this year. As an associate trainer, recently joined with Coacharya. A mentor coach to many coaches who are going through re-credentialing, I guess, to get to or maintain their PCC or ACC, and recently qualified coaching supervisor. For those of you who are unfamiliar with coaching supervision, I'll just go through the first 3 points that ICF mentions on their website. Coaching supervision is a collaborative learning practice to continually build the capacity of the coach through reflective dialogue and to benefit his or her clients and the overall system. This is not unlike coaching where we're in co-partnership with our client. But when I'm working with a coach per se, they're bringing in an issue or a challenge from perhaps a certain client situation or interaction that's kind of vexed the coach. And up until recently, coaches really didn't have anywhere to go. Mentor coaches are traditionally oriented towards ensuring the 11 core competencies of the ICF are maintained. So that was often the framework there. Coaching supervision really is a place for the two of us to sit down and say, okay, what's coming up for you as a coach? You're competent, you're doing the 11 core competencies, and yet there's still something that perhaps is not working as smoothly. So this is a collaborative learning practice. It's also a place where you can focus on the development of the coach's capacity through offering a richer and broader opportunity for support and development. So in this sense, it's very non-judgmental. and of course, non-assessment oriented too. I'm not here as a coaching supervisor to say, oh, well, you did this wrong, or you could have done this better. No, this is really a question for me and the coach to say, what can we both learn from this in a way that will help inform our practice going forward? I don't necessarily have the answers. You don't necessarily have the answers, but together perhaps we can start looking at what could be and what needs to shift along the way. So it really is supportive, and I'll get to that more about that a little bit later. Coaching supervision creates a safe environment for the coach to share their successes and failures and becoming masterful in the way they work with their clients. And this really is a wonderful opportunity for you as coaches to sit down with a coaching supervisor to explore the various ways that you can be more masterful in the way that you go about coaching. When I was doing a master's degree in coaching, I did in-depth analysis of 12 coaches and the way they go about doing their coaching. And I was informed by the fact that many of those coaches said they're still rooted in their training that they got as coaches as a framework for the way they go about doing their coaching. So if they were trained in Coach U or CTI or NLP or anything else, any other institutes, Hudson, Erickson, whatever, they invariably kept that sort of orientation of training with them. And that's not necessarily serving them in the best capacity as they evolve themselves as coaches. Because if you're locked into a certain framework, you don't give yourself enough leeway to meet the clients where they are. And so again, this idea of coming up with a kind of a universal approach started germinating in my head. And to the point where I said, you know, maybe there's something about Buddhism that we can start folding in here. And certainly my experience with Coacharya and the blending of East and West started to take hold. In 2017, I went to Oxford Brookes University in Oxford, England, courtesy of an invitation from Tatiana Bashkirova, who recently herself came here to Montreal just last week and did a presentation at the Coaching Supervision Conference, two-day conference here, where about 75 coaching supervisors from around the world, largely North and South America. But we had as far away as Hong Kong and Australia, so that was quite interesting. And again, reuniting with my professor Tatiana Bashkirova, and for those of you who don't know, she is a wonderful teacher, lecturer, but also author, and one of the most impactful books that she had on me. And as you can see behind me, if once we get back to the live cam, you'll see that I have over 1,000 books here, and I'm constantly reading. I read about 4 or 5 books a week. But this one definitely stood out, Developmental Coaching Working with the Self, and I can't recommend it enough. I'll just pinpoint one of the aspects of the book, and that's the idea of mini-selves that Tatiana brings to the equation. This idea that in any given situation, we have mini selves talking in our heads. So as coaches, sometimes we're like, where are we going with this conversation? Where's the client going with this conversation? I need to wrap this up. I have another client coming down. Maybe this isn't the client for me. I'm confused about the topic. I should get back on track. So all these voices keep clicking with us as coaches. And the idea is to recognize which mini self is driving the dynamic, and by extension, of our ego. And again, with Buddhism, the sense of ego and non-ego appeal to me in terms of the approach going forward. So where's your ego? What are the many selves that are driving your dynamic when you're working with a client or as a coaching supervisor with a coach? Because even I sometimes, when I'm working with a coach, will say, I'm getting caught up in the narrative, the story of the coach, and I'm just wondering how I can be of better service in this particular instance. So today I just ask that you come in with an open mind, an open heart to learn with us as we go forward. I will ideally have a coach online that we can examine a particular case and do a live demo of coaching supervision, and also fold in the roots of Buddhism and the approach to coaching and coaching supervision. And then I'll debrief, ideally with Louise, if she's on the line, open exchange of insights and learnings with you, the participants, and close it out. So with that, I'll just hopefully get to a case study before. Oh, okay. And we'll just stop the share there. So Ram, I don't know if Louise is on the line. If she is,
yeah, she is not on the line.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we don't see her there.
Okay. Priya, do you mind stepping in? I know it's putting you on the spot, but I'm just wondering if you have a coaching client or case currently or in the past that that you found challenging.
I'm just thinking about a session I had today. Well, it wasn't challenging, Michael, but I came away thinking maybe I should have done something differently. Is that a good starting point?
Absolutely, that's wonderful. Let's start there. And thank you for this short notice and participating. We won't go into the details of your case, but I'm just wondering if you can give me the headlines and the subtitle, if you will. If it was a newspaper heading, it would be "Client is X, therefore it's caused me X challenges."
So the client had was connecting some dots in his head, and he said his difficulty with managing key stakeholders is perhaps coming from him having challenges with positions of authority. And this is the conclusion, I mean, not a conclusion, but an insight that he arrived at in the conversation. After the conversation, I went ahead after that and said, okay, that sounds like something new. And what has been your relationship with authority figures? So when I closed the conversation, I felt perhaps I should have just stayed on with this idea of relationships, difficulty with people with authority. And I should have asked him where it came from.
Okay.
And helped him go through it in a way he confirms for himself, yes, it is because of this challenge that I'm facing challenges in my workplace as well.
Okay, wonderful. And so when you sat with that reflection of, thinking back and saying, oh, maybe I could have done something differently, what prompted you to think like that?
I thought it was as a moment of insight for him. And I felt later on, in retrospect, I missed an opportunity to anchor that and help him to go deeper, to confirm for himself whether this is true or not. Instead, I took his word and I just went with the exploration of where it, what has been his relationship, authority figures. Somewhere I felt I didn't give him the time to sort of digest that piece of connection that he had made in his head.
And so what do you think you could have done differently in terms of your approach at that point? If you could rewind the tape and insert a different question or approach, what would it have been?
So I think I should have asked a very curious question of where did this thought come from? And what makes him think so at this moment? Because the way he said it was, as I'm talking with you, Priya, this is what is coming up. So there was some point he was seeing as a connection, but I think I sort of rushed in. I could have just given him that space to say, I'm wondering where this came from.
Okay. So the way I'm hearing you and understanding you, he came with this issue. You kind of got caught up in and rightfully so, in the coach's agenda and the client's agenda to deal with this idea of working with authority figures and overcoming that challenge. And the idea of you working with that in a way that he could achieve that goal.
Mm-hmm.
But upon reflection, thinking, well, wait a second, what are his thoughts behind his own behavior towards this issue versus working with the issue? Does that sum it up in a way?
So the insight that he got was that he was having issues with authority figures, because he was the overall issue that he came into the conversation was about managing stakeholders upwards. He was doing a good job of working with people who were reporting to him, but not so well. He was not managing perceptions. He was not managing his stakeholders upwards.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of, maybe it's because I have this issue with people in position of authority was an insight during the conversation, was an awareness for him.
Mm-hmm.
I felt in retrospect, I could have anchored that and stayed with that thought a little more, so he could, play with it and check for himself whether it's true or not and how it plays out in his real life. So I felt that I missed an opportunity there for him to really work with this insight that he had.
Okay, wonderful. So upon retrospect, you went one way, but you could have gone another way.
Yes.
And you felt it probably would have had more service for the client.
Yes.
If he'd stayed in that, what was the thinking behind the way he was going about it?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So going forward, what would you like to do at your next opportunity should a similar client case arrive?
I think it's just remind myself to be curious. And to, in the service of the client, of course, not inquisitive, but curious. Yeah, I think that's what I'll remind myself the next time something like this happens.
Sure. And what would the benefit be by remaining curious in a non-inquisitive way?
The benefit would have been that, he would have really seen the power of the connection that he had made. And, my next question, I felt, took away that moment from him.
Okay.
I think I would like him to just stay with it. It would have been far more.
Right. So this idea, so two things are coming up for me right now that I'd like to check in with you. One is one of the core competencies is awareness. So this idea of working with awareness and service of the client, gaining more awareness of their own processes and way of being. And also for you as a coach to be less present as a coach and let the client almost self-coach in that moment.
I think I got excited about his awareness.
Wonderful. Well, that's great. I mean, we're all human. Hindsight is always 20/20 when it comes to coaching. I can't recall a single coaching session where even when it went really well, I thought, maybe I could have done this differently or that differently. Yeah. And again, it comes back to that sense of mini self, right? So the mini self, the competent coach says, oh, this is good. We can work with this. I can get to an action plan. And then the curious Priya says, you know what, let's just sit with this. I should go with my instinct on this one, even if it means going off the so-called framework of your coaching approach with this in service of the client. Wonderful. Okay, thank you so very much. So we'll just leave it at that if that's okay by you. Wonderful. Okay. And I'll just bring back up the share so we can see how, even with my mini session here with Priya, how Buddhism was actually very present in what we just did. Okay, so I'll just bring up the slideshow again so we can go through that. You can see that, Priya? You can
Yes,
see
sir.
the graphic?
Yeah, I can see
Okay,
that.
okay, great, super. So I assume everybody else can then too. Okay. So if we go to the central tenets of Buddhism, the it's informed by four noble truths for those who are not familiar with it, that the Buddha came up with after sitting in long contemplation. And he said, these are four noble truths that are basically very present in everything that everybody does. So the first noble truth is dukkha, or also translated sometimes not properly as suffering, but that's the most common interpretation. So we'll just stick with that for now. Thich Nhat Hanh came up with interpretations of the 12 turnings that are associated with the Four Noble Truths. So recognition, there is suffering; encouragement, suffering should be acknowledged; and the realization, suffering is accepted. So when I was talking to Priya just now, I asked her what was the challenge for her. And she said, well, I think I should have done this. And when I asked her to check in with that in terms of what benefit it would bring, she said it would benefit the client, and it would also benefit me as a coach. So the suffering there was acknowledged and accepted, that she did one thing when she could have done another. Just like the client himself acknowledges that there's suffering in his own world of dealing with authority figures, that he's acknowledging it by bringing it to coaching. And yet there's still a sense of, I don't know how to accept this. I need to explore this with my coach. The second noble truth, of course, is the source of the suffering. So where's this suffering coming from? And this is something that I wanted to check in with Priya without getting into the client story. So the recognition, there's an ignoble way that has led to the suffering. So there was something that Priya did that she said, you know what, I think I turned right when I could have turned left. And I should be identified. And she said, you know, when I identify it, I know it's curiosity, but not in the service of inquisition, but more in the service of offering to the client a way that we can identify that and say, you know what, client, let me interrupt you here. I just want to go back and check with you on something. You said this earlier, and I'm just curious as to what's coming up for you now, that we spend a little minute or two on that, if that's acceptable to you. So as a coach, you identify it for the client in the way that it can be understood. But by Priya's admission, by turning right instead of perhaps turning left, there was a missed opportunity, as she put it, for the client to get better understanding here on this ignoble path that has led to his suffering. Again, there's no right or wrong here. This is all a learning experience. And then the third noble truth, of course, is the cessation of suffering, and this idea of moving towards well-being. So this acknowledgement that the suffering can cease, that the encouragement coming from the coach can be suggested or co-created with the client, that the well-being should be pursued, and that well-being is worthwhile. And certainly when I was working with Priya just now in a very short session, we identified that that suffering can cease, that going forward she will be more mindful or more present, in the sense of going with her instinct of saying, you know what, I just want to step in here, even if it's not on the client's agenda per se. I think there's some rich territory here that would lead to better understanding and well-being in service of the client, and that that well-being would be worthwhile, both for Priya as a coach and for her client dealing with his issue. The fourth noble truth, the path of well-being, is the idea that a noble path to well-being is existing or unfolding as we coach together, or as I'm coaching, supervising Priya even. That the noble path should be lived. So this idea of Priya saying, you know what, I'm not going to do it in service of achieving a goal for the client. I'm going to do it in service of the client being able to sit with it and really get into a state of contemplation, whereas perhaps he hasn't had that opportunity to date to work with it. And that noble path, by living it and giving the client a space to live it, we're in that state of honoring that fourth noble truth. And of course, then, that the realization is that staying on this noble path maintains well-being. So I got the sense from Priya going forward that she's kind of committed to the sense of, you know what, whenever I get caught up in the client's story, I'll just check in with myself and say, you know what, I'm going to check in with my initial instinct, which was to go back and perhaps check on something so that it's not something, quote unquote, she missed, or a missed opportunity, as she put it. So how does this all fit in with coaching, apart from the description I just gave you of this case study with Priya and her client? Well, if we look at just a graphic, because I'm very much a visual person and a models person, we have the Four Noble Truths. We have suffering, the cause or the origin of the suffering, the end, the cessation of suffering, and the plan to the cessation of suffering. And again, with many clients, of course, they come in suffering. They may be able to identify the source of the suffering, or they may not. They're confused. So that bears further exploration. With the idea that with coaching, there's a possibility of the ending of suffering. And that path to the cessation of suffering is what ICF would kind of refer to as the action plan, right? No coaching sessions ever complete without an action plan, because there has to be some sort of forwarding of the action. It's not enough just to be in a contemplative mode. Now, I would kind of challenge that. I find that sometimes the situation calls for the coaching session to end, and that the majority of the times that I find in my case is that the coaching continues between sessions. That you, Priya, as a coach, revisit the session. The client is also revisiting the session and wondering, what if? Oh, maybe I hear Priya's voice now and I'm just thinking of something now in this situation with this authority figure. So oftentimes it's not necessary to actually explicitly nail down an action plan. It's enough to be in contemplation, because that is a form of action. So continue with Buddhism. The fourth noble truth, of course, the path to cessation of suffering, is unfolded in what is generally known as the Eightfold Path. And the Noble Eightfold Path can be considered divided into three trainings: wisdom, discernment, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. And the actual 8 parts of the Eightfold Path are right understanding, the right view, and the right thought and right intention. So certainly this was evident when I was supervising Priya just now, that she was intent on getting the right view. That her sense of discernment, when she said, oh, you know what, I sensed I had a missed opportunity. That's a sense of discernment. Wisdom, saying, you know what, but my intention was good. Perhaps the way I went about it needed to be tweaked. The ethical conduct. Did I have right speech, right action? Am I doing the right livelihood? And certainly I don't know Priya that well. In fact, I've only seen her a couple of times on Zoom sessions in the background, so to speak. But the way she spoke about her client, the way she took responsibility and acknowledged her own actions, saying she could have gone one way or the other. And oftentimes acknowledging that there is no one right action, but there are many right actions. And how can she adjust going forward? Really speaks to me about that she's in a position of doing the right thing as a coach. She's as a livelihood. That she's comfortable in the coaching, earning a living doing coaching. Then we move to the right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So here again, Priya was very concerned with the client perhaps moving towards right effort. and right mindfulness when dealing with authority figures. And when she said, you know, I had a missed opportunity, I got the sense that she was talking about the missed opportunity here for him to step back into himself, to get the right concentration on what needed to be done for himself to overcome this issue or this challenge of dealing with authority figures in his workplace. And how then he would react in a way that would precipitate right action, right speech, maintain his job as livelihood, and then check in with his intention and his right view on these things. So this is, for me, how I see Buddhism as a means to inform coaching and coaching supervision going forward. And I hope that this is resonating with you. And for me, taking it one step further, you know, what is your attitude going into a coaching session with a client, or your attitude going into a coaching supervision session? You know, Priya's attitude was, I'm coming from a place of inquiry. I'm curious not only about the client, but I'm curious about my own way of coaching. Her aptitude was acknowledged, saying, I could have done this, I could have done that. What I did certainly caused no harm to the client, but could I have done something a little bit differently? And that leads to acumen. How do we dance in the moment? We're constantly clicking on and off. And again, it comes back to that sense of mini selves, right? Anytime you hear the should, that's a mini self. That's a part of your ego, or one of your many egos crying out for attention. So being aware, of course, is central to very much Buddhism going forward. In coaching supervision, we, Hawkins has talked a lot about the seven-eyed model and parallel processes. So the client comes in with their own way of being, and the coach comes in with their own way of being. And one of them may be intent on achieving a goal, or both maybe. Or maybe they're in a place of contemplation and they just want to stay there for a little bit longer. So the coach's process, of course, is central to that dynamic. And of course, then the supervisor's process is, how am I going to work with Priya? And taking this kind of Buddhist approach with someone who's familiar with Buddhism, I think we can debrief shortly and to get Priya's viewpoint on this, of the wider context of what are the factors at play here. And for me, the wider context is always something that's usually the external, as opposed to the client's internal processes. As a coach, we're working with both external and internal as we drive or collaborate or work with a client, whatever word you want to use. And as a coaching supervisor, how do we kind of collaborate with each other in the sense of the wider context, or the overall issue, which is the cessation of suffering. So I'm just going to stop the share there for a second to check in with Priya and see what's coming up for her as I went through this explanation.
Michael, so this explanation of the 7-eye model, I think I couldn't quite catch the nuance and apply it straight away.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, but getting back to, you're right, and I apologize for that. I went to the next slide and found myself getting caught up in it, so I felt I had to explain it, but we can come back to it later. In terms of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, and you with your client, what's coming up for you?
Right now, I feel, I was holding myself quite responsible for not having used that opportunity for the client. And now, as I speak, I said, I mean, this too shall pass, right? I'm holding it more lightly. That it's a moment. It's moved on, and I'm quite okay. Because it was the sum of all the causes and the conditions that have come together that has made that moment. And it's okay to stay with that.
Wonderful. So again, let's name two other tenets of Buddhism: non-attachment and non-judgment. So non-attachment to what happened. We never know how it's going to land with the client or how it's going to land with ourselves in the moment. We can examine it and learn from it, but not be attached to it such that it becomes our sole focus or a driving focus. And the sense of non-judgment. Listen, you know, sometimes we do things in coaching sessions that we kind of regret or we think we could have done differently. That's a judgment. Name it for what it is. It's a form of suffering for you. So what is it about that thought that you just had, for instance, that I could have done something different? What was the locus behind that? Was it a sense of perfectionism, performance, professionalism? Any of those things can anytime come into play.
I think it's, you know, it's the professionalism that, I mean, this is, as a coach, this is what I want to enable for the client. And have I stolen that moment from him? Was the thought I was left with. But then I'm also, you know, Ram often says, trust the process, trust the client, and trust yourself. And at this point in time, having talked through this with you, I just feel I think I just trust myself that's what happened at that moment. And I'm not going to hold myself too harshly, but it's a reminder.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for participating and giving your insights and reflections on this, Priya. It's deeply appreciated.
Thank you. I was taken a little, I mean, I wasn't prepared, Michael, so I hope it served your purpose.
And that's wonderful because like a true client, most of the time they come in also unprepared, right? Yeah. But I'm glad you came in with a sense of wonder and an open heart and open mind. So thank you so very much for that. I'll just turn my attention now to the chat and see what's going on there. And Ram, if you want to comment on anything there.
Yeah, Michael, there were a couple of questions on what really is suffering definition. Then Priya had it put in there saying that the word dukkha, which is really the Balinese, the Buddha word, that was not, the suffering is not really what it is. And I had added something from a Buddhist perspective, pretty much everything in life is suffering. And that's what Buddha says. And it's all arising out of desires because the desires never end. And when there's a gap between the desire and the lack of fulfillment at some point or another, that's what leads to suffering. So those were some of the things that were said. But what I would like to ask both of you, because Priya has done quite some work in recent times on Buddhist psychology and philosophy and stuff like that, and you have done a lot of work. Priya mentioned about when I look back and I think, yeah, I feel like now. So it's a process of letting go. And you mentioned about the disengagement, detachment. I mean, so essentially the fundamental, though it's not that clearly articulated in the Noble Truths and the Noble Eight Pathways and so on and so forth, which in the Hindu tradition, in the Mandukya Upanishad, it's called the fourth state of awareness, which is about the witnessing, the observing, the detached, disengaged state, which is where, and you quoted Thich Nhat Hanh, and I'm a little bit allergic to him because of his mindfulness philosophy. I don't mind the mindfulness. Yes, the mindfulness is, I think, is a pretty good state of awareness when you have absolutely no awareness. You're like a couch potato and stuffing fries into your mouth and watching football or whatever nonsense it is. Yes, you need mindfulness, as I was explaining to someone the other day, that if you want to operate in the real world, irrespective of whether it's Maya, illusion, or the real world, you need to be mindful of what's happening around you. You need to be sensorily aware. But if you want to get to the stage of the exit from the suffering and so on, the only way to do that is to move to a point where it is mindlessness, as I call it, or no mind, which is about the sunya that Buddha talked about. So that moving from the mindfulness to the mindlessness, in coaching to me, that's very essential. the non-judgmental part of it that you talked about, or Otto Scharmer talks about the presencing state or the unconditional positive regard, any one of those kind of stuff. So would you like to address that a little bit in terms of whether it has any connection with your concept of what Buddhism is?
Well, absolutely. This idea of no mind is definitely a noble pursuit. And as a coach, you know, Maria Alefi Wood wrote a wonderful book called Presence, or Coaching Presence. And she talked about the four visibilities of a coach, moving from the invisible to the visible. So often, or from the visible to the invisible. So oftentimes when we start with a client, we're contracting with them, we listen to the story, we ask questions, and we slowly disappear into the background, and we let the client take ownership of their narrative and their own awareness. And we become less present in the coaching dynamic. And to Priya's point of letting the client perhaps sit with that thought that was arising and practicing non-attachment and mindlessness would have been in service of the ending of suffering, both for her as a need to perform, as an obligation as a coach, and really be with that person as they sit in that place of contemplation. As I said before, suffering is one interpretation. I've heard many different interpretations. I don't think we should be caught up so much in those words. And listen, a client comes in, we don't call it suffering, we call it they come in with a challenge, or they come in with an issue, or they come up with an objective. These are all forms of attachment, though. And attachment oftentimes does lead to suffering. The three unhealthy states of ego are wanting, thwarted wanting, or indifference. So a client that comes in and who desperately wants something all the time, they're in a state of grasping. When they come in dejected because they didn't get their promotion, or they're not achieving their goals, etc., they're in an unhealthy ego state. Or if they say, you know what, I just don't care anymore, I'm done with this. They're in an unhealthy ego state. So the idea of a coach to take a Buddhist approach, and again, I'm taking this as a philosophy, not as a religion, is to say, okay, what is going on here? Can we name it? What is the source of what's going on here? Is what's going on here addressable in a way that I, as a coach, can bring some closure to it? And not just closure to it to close it, but more to the point of the fourth noble truth. What is the pathway forward for this client, for them to build their own path, their own behaviors, their own attitudes, their own speech and livelihood in a way that's more connected with their essence of being, as opposed to caught up in perhaps their defined role and responsibility that perhaps their job involves. So this idea of identity. So to your point, Ram, about mindlessness, that's non-identity, non-identification with the issue, non-identification with what's happening. But still, there's a slight tension going on there that we as coaches still have to do some coaching. We can't just be sitting there witnessing.
Michael, I mean, that's absolutely brilliant in terms of starting with the fact that the client comes with an attachment, a desire, and there is a gap between what the client wants and where the client is. That is the one that leads to suffering, perhaps. And then moving from there to find out what is the cause of suffering, what is the end of suffering, and what is the pathway to suffering, which is really the awareness and the action. Beautifully fits in with the coaching competencies. The one question that I have is that you mentioned that there is the thought and the difference and
it's the level of engagement. So indifference or apathy is you're just disengaged and you're self-involved. So when you're in an apathetic state, you decide, I'm not going to vote, for instance, in an upcoming election. I'm not going to contribute to anybody else's success or welfare, as opposed to mindlessness, as you put it, which is a state of allowing, and allowing what is around us and about us to appear, to manifest. And when you're in a state of apathy, you're not allowing anything to manifest in any significant way. You're just allowing it, and you're kind of cynical about it. And it can spiral in different directions, of course.
So semantically, the word indifference, as you're using it, I don't know really the Pali word or the Sanskrit word for that at the moment, is about the helplessness. I'm indifferent because I cannot do anything about it. Whereas being mindless is, I can do something about it. I choose not to do about it.
Correct.
Would that be the difference?
Yes, that's definitely one of the differences for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So my question actually is, if the coach chooses to be mindless in that sense, knowing what is happening between the client and the situation, and yeah, so what? I mean, everything is going to end up in suffering anyway.
Well,
so eventually it will pan out, right?
Well, again, to your point of mindlessness, when you're in a state of receptivity, the client is exploring that issue, and you're giving them the space, the time, and the means to explore that in a way that they can start making sense of it. So you're a vessel then taking this in, and as a coach, you don't have to come back with that all important, powerful question. It can just come back with a simple reflection. It goes in and comes out. You're not holding on to it, you're offering it back. Client, I hear you talking about this. I noticed this happening in your body. I noticed this in the words that you're using. I noticed that you always seem to be placing the responsibility on that authority figure, and no authority, no responsibility for yourself. Help me understand this dichotomy that you are narrating as your perception. And again, it's not because I want to understand it. It's I am here as a facilitator to help you understand it. So that as mindless as we are, we're still very much engaged, as opposed to being in a state of apathy or indifference where, whatever, dude, have a nice day, hope it works out for you. Even that's a sense of optimism, right?
So Michael, if I may just add to that, I think being a witness in a state of mindlessness, I think there's also some amount of compassion that comes through, which is not present when you're, when apathy is in place, right? It's coming from us, like Carl Rogers said, from a space of unconditional positive regard.
Right.
And eventually it's also about the client recognizing themselves and being the witness to themselves.
Exactly.
So I think that's a big moment for the client as well. If they are able to look within themselves and notice what's going on for themselves.
And for you to be, as a coach, in a place of non-attachment and non-judgment, full of compassion. Loving kindness is also a central tenet of Buddhism. So unconditional positive regard and loving kindness, there's a lot of commonality there.
Yeah, Michael, for both of you who are Buddhist experts, I want to throw a spanner in the works, okay?
I saw that coming, Ram.
Okay, simply put, I don't think that definition of mindlessness, though I talk about it, works, period. Because you cannot say at one level I'm disengaged, I'm detached, I'm a witness, and I'm a server, and also say in the other breath that I'm getting engaged because out of compassion or whatever the reason is. So I would go pre-Buddha to Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, where he says, as a human being, you have no option but to act. Action is a part of your nature. You will never be able to get rid of it. However, what you can do is to detach yourself from the outcome of the action. You're no longer obsessed, wedded attached to the action. And that recipe, I think, honestly, is far more powerful than the pure Buddhist philosophy of saying that everything is suffering, and therefore all that you have to do is to sit and cry or completely go into nirvana. Sit
No,
under
that's
the
not
Bodhi tree.
what is being said. It's
No.
just, it's really about,
I'm just throwing a spanner in the works. Sorry.
yeah.
Of course you are.
Yeah. So action is very important in this, in the way action is about being awake. So it's not like you're just sitting and allowing life to go on. You're experiencing life, but you're not getting attached to any one part, which causes suffering. That's all it is.
Okay, so therefore, would you sort of poke the life with your finger and say, hey, I would like you to move a little bit this way or that way, so to end the suffering?
I would, but knowing that, that's another path that it may cause something else, but in the moment, I'm okay with that.
Absolutely. That's very true. That is what the current quantum mechanics string theory says and the membrane theory.
Okay, I don't know that yet.
You push the universe in one point, it sort of bulges at another point. So all these things come together, really, the Buddhism, the Hinduism, quantum theory and everything. That's really what is fascinating about it. But to end with, we have about another 5 minutes or so, Michael. In terms of practical application, and when you coach or supervise, what do you see by using this Buddhist philosophical approach?
Well, I was rather taken by a quote I read a number of years ago, and I think that's what led me down this path. I'll just open and close a parenthesis. I'm not an expert in Buddhism. I do study it in terms of how it informs coaching, but there are many other forms. Like I said, I've studied many other influences of coaching. The quote that resonated with me that I read a number of years ago goes like this. We are not human beings in search of a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Together we exist, together we suffer, together we create each other. And to your point of quantum physics, yes, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and there's always a chain result. But to Priya's point, when she said, you know what, I could have done this, but I'm okay with it. I'm letting it go. And the client will take what the client takes. Invariably, I'm always shocked at how much of my coaching, it never even lands with the client, so to speak, because the client's in their world, they're processing it. I can't possibly be privy to that. So this idea of being engaged in a non-interfering way is another form of Buddhism, right? Practicing non-interference. So how do we minimize our interference with the client's processes and the client's systems going forward, and being mindful, careful, and not egotistical about that?
So in a sense, therefore, it leads to that ultimate truth of coaching, which is about presence, which I often describe as the absence of ego. With
Correct.
Total non-attachment to the outcome, if the coach just continues to explore with pure generative listening and unconditional positive regard, that would surely be the best way of whatever best that can happen, because you're not attached to an agenda. You don't know what the client is really looking for, whatever may happen within the client's head. So the most powerful way would be to just keep exploring without any kind of an idea where one is going.
Exactly. And what's running in the back of my mind, as mindless as I'd like to be, is where is the suffering? What is the suffering here that's not being spoken of? Sometimes a client will come in and talk about the authority figure. That's an external, right? I want to know what the internal process is, because that's where real change happens. So what is the spirit trying to communicate through this vessel of a body that's before me? And how can I connect spirit to explore where is this suffering? Is there suffering? And what is the suffering behind this issue? And that's why I was asking Priya, to kind of zero in on what was driving her orientation about this issue that she brought it up. And it was the sense of, her suffering, as I understood it, and Priya, you can correct me on this, was I felt that I didn't give everything I could have to this session in the way that the client could have explored it more. I put my curiosity in that moment ahead of the client's own curiosity. And so that I was creating a bit of a shift in the dynamic.
Michael, thank you very, very much. It's certainly, for me specifically, it's been an eye-opener. And thanks, Priya, for joining with your background knowledge as well. I just want to let all of you know, the listeners, that probably in the next few months, we would be having Michael run a mastery webinar program for about 30 hours on applying the Buddhist philosophy in coaching. And coaching supervision is, as he has termed it now, in a larger sense. So we'll keep that announcement at a later point in time. And we are also going to have a month-long colloquium in October, where one of the panels that we are forming is going to be 5 people, Michael representing Buddhism and Ramcharan representing Hinduism, both of them not Indian or anything of that sort. And then we have Carol Glazer, who's a Jew for Judaism, Irfan Dabir, who's coming for Islam, and John Sirao for Christianity. We have the 5 of them coming together, and somebody asked me, what is it supposed to do? I don't know, honestly. But simply that all religions, all philosophies have a common truth. And today, in this day of intolerance that we experience all across the world, that truth is being lost. And I think, looking at it from a coaching perspective, the way that Michael explained just now, starting with why we are attached to something and how we can move to something in a slightly detached way to find out that pathway out of that suffering. Each religion approaches it in a very, very different way, but all of them lead to the same point, that there is some way out of the suffering that we face. And that is all that we are trying to do. It's an experiment. I have no idea where that is going to start and where that is going to end. But one of the players is sitting here. So I'll just introduce him. And then we'll probably have also this program along with Michael running this on the Buddhist theory. Similarly, other people coming in with other interpretations. And hopefully there'll be an audience who would like to learn more about these. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Priya. And thank you all of you who have patiently sat with us for the last about an hour or so. Take care. Bye.